and welcome to the Chronicles of Yarnia, the podcast from Montclair's local yarn store. My name's Amanda, and I'm coming to you today from Yarnia with a little bit of a special episode. Today, I'm talking about how to shop a local yarn store on a budget. Now, we have at our store, of course, all of the beautiful hand-dyed yarns from independent makers and artists that are fantastic to touch and beautiful in the skein as well as in your finished objects. But sometimes those don't quite vibe with the budget that you've set for a project. I'm going to give you 7 tips today to help you stay in budget and happy with the yarn that you've purchased for your project. While we all love a hand-dyed or a kettle-dyed yarns, when somebody has to individually work with each skein, either in a dye pot or a dye bath, that, as you can imagine, that raises the cost per skein because the labor cost involved in producing that yarn. Instead, take a look at commercial yarns, and that's tip number 1. Commercial yarns are dyed in larger batches, and that means that the labor cost per skein is lower and they're able to be provided at more affordable costs on the shelf. Commercial yarns like these have amazing fiber qualities. The companies that produce them work hard to make sure that the fiber blends will be very interesting to the knitter and they'll look fantastic in your finished product. Tip number 2 for shopping a local yarn store on a budget is to consider finer gauges. If you love the look of hand-dyed yarns, which I completely adore, but you still want to keep the cost of that project down, consider finer gauges, like fingering weight. If we take a look at this skein, which is a worsted weight yarn, priced at $28 per skein, the yardage is 190 yards per 100 grams. That's going to only get you so much knitting. Whereas if we look at this yarn, also $28 per 100 grams, there's 420 yards for this same 100 grams. That's going to get you much further on your project and a lot more knitting time. And who isn't in it for the love of knitting? Tip number 3 is a goodie. Almost every store has a sales section, but what can you find there and what do you do with it? A lot of times we go to the sales section and we might find something that catches our eye and we take it home without any clear ideas on what we want to do with it. Is that a way to shop on a budget? No, we've just spent money that we could have spent on a project we're really going to love to get yarn that felt good at the time, but now we don't know what to do with it. So here's some tips. First, if you're shopping for a shawl, a fingering weight shawl, usually 1 or 2 or 3 skeins will do the trick. I like to have a 2 skein shawl, unless you're doing one of the, famous designer shawls that needs 5 or 6 skeins. Those are pretty labor intensive as well as financially intensive investments. So you might want to plan those out over a longer period of time. But in the sales section, if you find 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn, that's going to make you a nice shawl. Now for sweaters, a good tip is to take to your shop a little post-it or an index card that has your yardage for sweaters on it. That means that you've taken a look at some basic sweater patterns and figured out, oh, for a fingering weight sweater, I need 1,600 yards. For a worsted weight sweater, I need 1,200 yards, right? Okay, so that lets me, when I come to the sales section, I have that sticky note with me, and I can easily say, oh, here's a sport weight yarn. How many yards are there here? Is that enough for me to make a sweater with it? And if it is, it's my lucky day. Tip number 4. While not always the case, sometimes, just like at the grocery store, the best deals can be on the top shelf or on the bottom shelf, which folks aren't always looking at when they come into a yarn store. Up here on the top shelf, you might take a look and find some yarns that are a similar weight to the ones you're browsing at eye level, but maybe at a lower price point, and the same thing for the bottom shelf. So let your eyes gauge all over the shelves and the weight that you're looking at, and you might find some really good deals. Tip number 5 is to not get stuck on one particular type of fiber. So if you come into the store looking for 100% wool, that's fine, but consider broadening your horizons to different fiber blends. If you look at commercially made garments, they're often made with blends of fibers rather than 100% of a particular fiber. So a yarn that's a blend has been designed by the manufacturer to bring the attributes of all the fibers that are going into that yarn to make the perfect skein. So a blend like this one that has some synthetic fibers as well as some wool, or these as well that have synthetic fibers blended with wool, accomplish a few things. Not only do they have a little bit less wool content, that means the price can be a little bit lower, but they're also blending the attributes of wool, like warmth and coziness, with the attributes of synthetic fibers, like durability and washability, which could also be nice for you in your finished product. Another idea, if you found a yarn you love, but it just doesn't quite go far enough, is to create your own blend. By that, I mean take 2 skeins of yarn, either a similar color or different colors, and hold them together to make a thicker gauge fabric. That way, you can use your finer gauge yarns, which will go a long way in a project, with perhaps a more inexpensive option, hold them together, and enjoy that special skein all the way throughout a project you're working on. Last, but certainly not least, is to ask your local yarn store owner or worker at the store what they would recommend for your project. I'll tell you, we yarn store owners have taken a lot of work to pick out all the yarn in the store that works the best for our community. There's nothing more that we love than having a customer come and say, I really want to do this project, but I need help finding yarn that works in my budget. Be clear with your budget. Absolutely, there's no reason for me to pull yarn that's not going to make you happy and be excited about completing or starting a new knitting or crochet project. So I'll work with you. I know my yarn in the store like the back of my hand, and I even know some things that might not be on the floor that if you give me an idea of what you're looking for, I can find them for you and pull the perfect yarn for your project. I hope this episode has been really useful for you, and if you enjoy it, you'd like to see more, be sure to like and subscribe down in the corner. And I look forward to seeing you in your local yarn store. Bye!